Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I wanted to do a video discussing some of my most recent reads and do a reading recap or wrap up for the months of April and March and just share what I've been enjoying over the past spring and some of the books that I've been reading. I actually had a very impressive reading month and I read a total of 9 books over the past months of March and April. I'm very proud of myself for doing. So I wanted to update you guys on what I've been reading and my thoughts on some of these books. So the first book is The Kalevala by Elias Lönnrot and translated by Keith Bosley. This is the great Finnish epic. It contains a lot of the epic poetry and oral tradition of Finland. I'm actually still reading this book. This is one that I've just decided to take my time with and go easy with because it's been very tedious to get through because it is epic poetry and it's told in verse and it's a lot of pages. So I've just been taking my time reading it bit by bit as I go, a few verses at a time, and not really rushing to complete this book really at a certain point, just kind of reading it casually. So I am still technically reading it, but I do count it for the past couple months because I have read some of it throughout those months. I'm on page 216 of it right now. So the Kalevala is the oral tradition of Finland, which was compiled in the 1800s, and this body of literature has been very significant to Finland as a nation. It's had a huge role in their independence and their national identity and their culture. So I wanted to read it for the cultural significance and also because I have a very deep interest in Northern European folklore and traditions and mythology and cultures. I know a lot about Celtic and like Norse Germanic culture and folklore. I know the Vikings are pretty mainstream at this point, so a lot of people know like Norse mythology, but I didn't really know a lot about Finnish mythology, and I wanted to read something that was very culturally significant to Finland. And it's translated by Keith Bosley, or Bosley, I'm not exactly sure how to say it, and I've also been listening to this on an audiobook because it is, after all, an oral tradition. It's a poem. So I thought it would be very nice to listen to it because that's traditionally how it would have been told. And so the audiobook is actually narrated by the translator, Keith Bosley. So I think that's pretty cool to have kind of that connection there. I would like to do a review on this at some point when I finish it, but it is just a tedious book to get through. Like, there's just so much going on in it. The book is heavily focused on the prehistoric culture of Finland, so there's a lot that has to do with fishing, hunting, and magic. It's very interesting, even though it's a little bit difficult to read through. And this was also a key text for J.R.R. Tolkien in writing the Silmarillion, which is another reason that I wanted to pick this book up, is to read it as the original reference that Tolkien used for writing his stories. It's been very hard to read through and kind of hard to follow just because of the amount of verses and just lyrical wording. So sometimes you're reading something and I just have no idea what's happening. I'm like, what is going on? But it's still been a very interesting book to get through, and I would like to do a full review on it when I'm done. Now, the next few books were some graphic novels that I read in the month of March, mostly comics because I was excited for The Batman, which was coming out. To get prepared for that movie, I picked up some Batman graphic novels, and so the first one here is Batman Year One by Frank Miller. This book is the definitive origin of Batman. Batman's been around since the 1930s, but in the 1980s, I think 1986. In 1986, Frank Miller sort of revamped the character, relaunched Batman. Year One is like the central starting point, basically. Like, that's how important and definitive the story became. Now, I have read this book before. I actually read it a few years ago for one of the Booktubeathon vlogs, so if you're interested in seeing some of my initial thoughts from like the first time I read it, you can check that video out. But this really is a story that focuses a lot on Jim Gordon. It's kind of a Jim Gordon origin story as much as it is Batman. Very, very good book. I've rated it, I think, 5 stars, either 4 or 5 stars, I don't remember now, but fantastic read. Next book I picked up was The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. This is the sequel or follow-up story to Batman Year One. Even though chronologically they weren't exactly published back-to-back, continuity-wise, this book really starts basically right where Batman Year One ends. Batman Year One is the definitive origin story for Batman. This is probably one of his peak stories. Like, this is one of the greatest Batman stories that I think I've ever read. I could not put this book down. I was heavily invested in the story and I read it in one sitting. It was so interesting. So The Long Halloween is about Batman kind of in his second or third year as Batman, and it's a murder mystery that takes place over the course of a whole year on all of the major holidays. Jim Gordon and Batman, Bruce Wayne, and Harvey Dent all team up and form the sort of triumvirate of heroes in Gotham, trying to find the mystery killer and solve this whole mystery throughout the entire course of the year. And there's some insane plot twists and some stuff that just is way out there. And we also see the corruption of Harvey Dent and how he turns into Two-Face. And that was really cool because this is the original, like, how he became Two-Face. So despite like the different adaptations from the movies, this was like the source material for that. And I'm glad that I finally read the story in full because I started the book on Halloween last year and just wanted to browse it because it was Halloween night. I wanted something to read, and I thought Batman: The Long Halloween Murder Mystery was a perfect spooky read for the night. So I just kind of briefly perused it, but I didn't actually get around to reading it. But I did make a vlog about it that if I haven't posted yet, maybe I will. Just kind of a lost vlog from 2021, but I did try to read this around Halloween of last year. I think I also gave this book 5 stars, so I'm glad that I finally picked it up and just read the full story. It was definitely worth reading. It was so good. And then following up with that, I also read Batman Dark Victory, which is the sequel to The Long Halloween. And this book deals a lot more with the aftermath of all of the events from The Long Halloween. It focuses heavily on some characters that were introduced in the latter half of the story, and it follows them much more closely in this book and just what they're doing kind of in the aftermath of the finale of everything that happened. It also gives a new origin to Robin, or the Dick Grayson Robin, because there's been like 4 or 5 Robins. So it gives a new origin to Robin as Batman's apprentice, and it focuses a lot more on Batman and Catwoman's relationship. There's actually some interesting character revelations about Catwoman that are explored in this book and also in the Batman movie. So I thought that was a neat little Easter egg, I guess, from that. I gave this book 4 stars because as good as it was, it definitely felt a little repetitive, trying to kind of redo the plot of A Long Halloween, but with the added context of everything that happened in that story. The last Batman comic that I read for the month of March was Batman Ego by Darwin Cook. This story really explores Batman's darkness and the burden that he carries as Batman, and he really struggles with the double life of being Bruce Wayne and being Batman. And I really liked how they worked with that. They portrayed Batman sort of as a second personality, and so he is a physical persona talking to Bruce, and he's very like menacing and terrifying looking. It felt very spooky, very Batman and Gotham-like. I really enjoyed it. I didn't read the entire volume because there are some other stories in here besides Ego, but I did read that one because it's the primary story. And then I also read Date Night and Deja Vu, which were 2 other stories in here. Date Night's just a ridiculous Catwoman, Batman rampage through the city, and that's like their date, is they're chasing each other through Gotham City and flirting, and it's funny, but it was kind of bizarre, like what is happening in this book. And then the other one I read was Deja Vu, where Batman witnesses an innocent family gunned down by a mugger, and it reminds him of his own tragedies and his own family, and so he goes after the attackers and just unleashes on them, and it's really, really cool. The artwork's really good. It's a lot of red and black, which really focuses on the like scary aspect of it and the kind of gory aspect of it. Very much felt like a terrifying Batman adventure. So yeah, here's some of the artwork from it. Just really good stuff. So to wrap up March, the last book that I read was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This book was amazing. This was another one that I just couldn't put down, and I stayed up all night reading it. It was so good. I'm actually editing a reading vlog that I filmed for it, giving you guys like all of my live reactions and thoughts. This book is sort of a mixture of The Martian and Interstellar, kind of mixed into one story. And I just really love the hard science fiction in this book. It feels so believable, like it really could be real. The plot was so intriguing, and there was actually some pretty big twists in it that made the book so much better, because it feels very palatable to someone who isn't like a super genius scientist, or someone who's not even really that into science fiction. You could still really enjoy this book and feel like it was very easy to read. It just takes all of the greatest elements of Interstellar and mixes them in with The Martian, and it just makes this book so good. Andy Weir is such a talented sci-fi writer. I have read his other book. It's Artemis. It's actually another Booktubeathon read, so if you want to watch my old Booktubeathon vlogs, I feature some of these books in these vlogs. Kind of funny. And I did not enjoy this one as much. He was going for something a little more unique, but I don't think it really landed well. But Project Hail Mary is by far his best book since The Martian. It is just so good. I wanted to give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. There was a couple of gripes that I had with it that I didn't really like. One of them being I felt like there was too much switching between the 2 parallel narratives. Just when the book started getting really interesting in one side of the narrative, it would switch to the other, and then you'd have to kind of slog through that to get back to the interesting stuff. So That was a little frustrating at times. That didn't affect like how easy it was to read, just that I didn't enjoy constantly having to go back and forth. And then just the other gripe that I had with it is that the character in here feels very much like the character from The Martian. Mark Watney is the main character from that story, and it feels like you could have taken him from that story and put him into this book and it was the exact same character mostly. Props to Andy Weir for writing what he knows, which is a, nerdy science guy who's got a sense of humor and wit, and he has to MacGyver his way out of scientific scenarios. Like, that's basically what Andy Weir knows how to write, and he's really damn good at it. So I really enjoyed this book. Even with those small gripes, I still gave it a very high rating. It was such a fantastic read. Highly recommend this book. Throughout the whole month of April, actually, reread the entire Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins. The reason I wanted to read these again was because it has been 10 years now since the books and the movies have come out. So it's hard to think about, like, 10 years ago when I first read these stories. So it was really nice to return to this world and re-experience reading these again now that I'm older and I have so much more education behind me. Like, I have such a bigger knowledge base than I did. So I picked up so much more when I was reading these books this time around that I didn't get when I was younger, simply because I just know more stuff now. And I thought that was really interesting. There's so many parallels in this story to actual history, not only just with like Roman gladiators, but also feudalism in England. Katniss kind of resembles Robin Hood in a few ways, so I thought that was a neat connection that I had never noticed before until I read it this time. So I really, really enjoyed this series and just returning to this world of Panem. It's been so long that it felt new but still familiar. I really like how this series just pulls no punches. It is a grim, violent, dark series, which you just don't see a lot in YA fiction much these days. At least I don't, because I don't really read as much of that anymore. So it is very refreshing when you pick up just one of these really good classic YA stories that has just been so popular and so well loved. I do want to make a full review of this series, which will be a separate video, because I have so many thoughts I just want to talk about it. I've never done like a formal review of this series on my channel, so I've wanted to, and just discuss everything because it's such a good story. Now, talking about the books themselves, The Hunger Games, I think, is my personal favorite. I just love the story. I like that it's a little more self-contained than the second two, which are much more kind of an expanded universe of Panem. This story was really the core of the whole series. Like, it is the Hunger Games survival story of the underdog trying to win, and I just really liked how it was a great introduction to the world. It was a solid story with like very clear motivations from the characters, a very clear beginning, middle, and end. It's just such a nicely contained story, which is why I really enjoyed it. However, reading Catching Fire after that, this book was so good as well. Even if it's not my favorite, it's definitely my second favorite because of just how much it expands the world of Panem, how much it introduces us to new elements of the world, and just raises the stakes of the whole story. Like everything, like with the Quarter Quell being kind of this new spin on the classic Hunger Games and having to deal with all of the old victors coming back to fight again in the new Hunger Games. And then, of course, we have the introduction of new characters like Joanna and Finnick and Beetee. So it's really great to just have that expanded world, and I feel like Catching Fire was a very strong sequel to Hunger Games. And then lastly, reading Mockingjay, I have to admit, I actually kind of DNF'd this book at the end. I read like 95% of it, but I just ended up DNFing it. I'm so familiar with the story. I mean, it's not like it's the first time I've read it. This is technically a reread. I've seen the movie a dozen times. Like, I'm very familiar with it. I know the story. I know how it ends. But it's fine. I still really, really enjoyed this one. I think I actually liked Mockingjay because this book really is the darkest, I think, of all of the series. Like, it's the most grim because it's a war story. And some of the gripes that I had reading this book originally didn't bother me this time. Like, I was actually fine with some of the character choices, the writing choices. It wasn't as difficult to slog through as it was the first time I read it. So that was nice. I don't think it's as strong as the first two, mainly because it's not really focused on the core element of the Hunger Games and all of that, because it is the ending, it is the finale, so it's focused a lot more on the aftermath of the first two books. Definitely, I think, the least favorite of the three for me, but it's not terrible. Like, I don't hate it. I just don't like it as much as the other two. Last year, I had the chance to go visit the Swan House and actually see where they filmed President Snow's mansion from the movie. It was like a really cool experience getting to see the actual Hunger Games house set from the movie. And now that I think about it, I was actually wearing this exact shirt, which that's crazy. But that was a lot of fun. So yeah, this was my reading wrap up from March and April, and I'm really, really happy with myself for being able to read all of these books. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a like. I'd be interested to know what you guys have been reading over the past spring season and how your April reading month went. So let me know down below in the comments. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.